trail. Oh, man.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the most divisive murder cases that tend to spark disagreements and arguments.
It's death for Hoffman!
Lyle and Erik Menéndez.
Why did we do it?
Yes, Eric. Parricide is a very, very serious course of action to take.
The question isn't whether Lyle and Erik Menéndez killed their parents. That much is a given. The question is whether the killings were justified. And it's here where people tend to diverge. The brothers committed the crime on August 20th, 1989, and when put on trial, they claimed that they had suffered horrible abuse at the hands of their parents.
And in that moment, I knew it was going to happen. I knew we were going to go through with it.
The defense claimed that the killings were performed out of fear and revenge, while the prosecution argued that they had financial motives. The mixed public perception was mirrored in the two juries, who came back deadlocked and without a verdict. It wasn't until the second trial, when the brothers' abuse claims were severely limited, that they were found guilty and imprisoned.
Earlier, a jury recommended that Lyle and Erik Menéndez be sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms for the brutal slaying of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez.
The killing of Johnny Stompanato.
Frank, look, if I divorce Nick, he'll never give me a nickel. He'll keep the Twin Oaks and everything.
Well, what do we care?
Lana Turner is an icon of the golden age of Hollywood, and she also had a very public relationship with Johnny Stompanato, the famous enforcer of gangster Mickey Cohen. He was known to be abusive towards Turner, and on April 4th, 1958, he was stabbed and killed by Turner's daughter Cheryl Crane in an act of self-defense. While Crane was exonerated, public opinion was and remains divided. The press fiercely criticized Turner's performative behavior during the trial, and she later settled a wrongful death lawsuit brought on by Stompanato's ex-wife. A conspiracy theory has also grown in recent years, claiming that it was Turner herself who stabbed Stompanato, and that Crane took the blame to protect her mother's reputation.
There's one thing we could do that would fix everything for us.
What? Pray for something to happen to Nick?
Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey.
And she says, Brendan, how could you possibly have done some of this? I saw you at home at 5:00 p.m.
The story of Stephen Avery and his young nephew Brendan Dassey earned widespread attention through the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer. The show was a pop culture sensation, with viewers engaging in fierce debate and discussing the merits of their imprisonment. Both men were allegedly involved in the murder of Teresa Halbach, and both were sentenced to life in prison.
He was only interested in getting Brendan to plead guilty so Brendan could be an asset for the prosecution against his uncle.
However, many aspects of the case, including Dassey's coerced confession and the potential for police misconduct, have raised some major quandaries and brought their guilt into question. The case has become emblematic of concerns over wrongful convictions, abuses of power, and the treatment of vulnerable defendants in the legal system.
I would hope that those people don't give up on Stephen Avery.
Michael Peterson.
What kind of accident?
Still downstairs. She's still breathing. Please come.
Is she conscious?
What?
Is she conscious?
No, she's not conscious.
One of the most infamous and debated criminal cases in recent American history began on December 9th, 2001. That night, Peterson called 911, saying that he had found his wife Kathleen at the bottom of the stairs, unconscious and covered in blood. He claimed she had fallen after drinking alcohol and taking Valium.
I'm not sure. We probably had another bottle. I know we were drinking 2 bottles that night.
However, authorities were suspicious due to the extensive amount of blood found at the scene and Kathleen's severe injuries, which they argued were inconsistent with a simple fall. Peterson was found guilty of murdering his wife, but was released in 2017. Kathleen's true cause of death remains a point of fierce debate, and some serious issues with the forensic evidence have been raised, casting further doubt on Peterson's presumed guilt.
He was just like, he was in shock kind of, and he was just kind of shaking, and he was like, I didn't do it. You know, you have to believe me. And we were like, Dad, we believe you.
Caylee and Casey Anthony.
Because I believe my daughter should have been put in jail. I was hoping so. Yeah, absolutely, I was.
Hoping so.
That's right.
One of the first trials of the social media age, the death of Caylee Anthony has sown incredible division. Many people believe that Caylee was murdered by her mother, Casey Anthony, supposedly to free her from the obligations of motherhood. The defense claims that Caylee drowned in the family pool and that her grandfather helped cover it up.
Based on what we have right now, your daughter is facing either death or she could be in in jail for the rest of her life.
The case became a media circus, and Casey was ultimately acquitted, upsetting many. The verdict had hinged entirely on reasonable doubt, as the prosecution could not definitively prove how Caylee died or that Casey was responsible. Many believe Casey got away with murder, while others argue that the jury made the correct legal decision based on the evidence presented.
What has changed in that time for Casey?
She's tried to experience some semblance of freedom, but she's never left alone.
The death of Hae Min Lee.
Now, this is a story WJZ has been following for years, and now another twist in the long legal battle as a new hearing is ordered in Baltimore Circuit Court.
Serial was one of the first big true crime podcasts, telling the captivating story of Hae Min Lee. Lee was a high school student who was found dead in Baltimore's Leakin Park, about a month after she was reported missing. Lee's ex-boyfriend Adnan Syed was charged with her murder.
Our family, we've suffered so much, just over the past almost 24 years. And it's really hard for us.
The prosecution relied heavily on the word of Jay Wilds, a friend of Syed who claimed that Syed killed her and that he helped him bury the body. However, his and other witness testimonies have been heavily questioned and scrutinized. Syed has also bounced around the legal system. His conviction was vacated in 2022 owing to new evidence, but it was officially reinstated just a few months later. This is a confusing one.
Huh. Adnan Syed from the Serial podcast is released from jail. Nah, that's way too controversial for me.
Lizzie Borden.
She killed her mother with 40 whacks.
An enormously popular story from turn-of-the-century America, the tale of Lizzie Borden has endured in folk rhymes, literature, and film. On the morning of August 4th, 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were found brutally murdered in their Massachusetts home. Suspicion immediately fell on Lizzie, and she was arrested just a few days later.
I'm not afraid of you.
Then you haven't been paying attention.
However, she was eventually acquitted because much of the evidence was circumstantial, and the murderer never faced justice. However, Lizzie never shed her cloud of supposed guilt, and she was ostracized by the community in which she lived. Ultimately, while Borden remains the prime suspect in public perception, the lack of concrete evidence and the ambiguities surrounding the case allow it to live in infamy.
All these years, 127 years, no one ever found out who he was.
Sam Shepard.
So, why did Richard Kimball kill his wife?
He did it for the money.
What do you mean he did it for the money? He's a doctor. He's already rich.
Well, she was more rich.
On July 4th, 1954, the Shepard home was seemingly invaded by an intruder who bludgeoned Marilyn Shepard to death in her bed. Her husband Sam was charged with her murder, and while the defense went with the mysterious intruder angle, the jury was not convinced, and he was found guilty of killing his wife.
I didn't kill my wife! I don't care!
But in 1964, after serving nearly a decade in prison, Shepard's conviction was overturned by the Supreme Court, who criticized the, quote, carnival atmosphere of the trial and a biased judge. While the prevailing view supports Shepard's innocence following his acquittal, there still remains a segment of the population that believes he may have been involved. This is largely owing to some inconsistencies in his testimony and various pieces of circumstantial evidence.
Thought you didn't care.
I don't.
The Lindbergh Kidnapping.
How did he get up there? Are there marks on the window and wall as well?
There was a ladder. We found it 100 yards away, 3 pieces. We moved it inside.
Famously called the biggest story since the resurrection, the Lindbergh kidnapping occurred on March 1st, 1932, when young Charles Lindbergh Jr. was kidnapped from his home and murdered. The finger was pointed squarely at a German immigrant named Bruno Hauptmann, who was charged with the crime and ultimately executed following a highly publicized trial.
It is the address and telephone number of Dr. Condon, the man who paid the ransom, written in your writing, found on a board in your closet.
However, he professed his innocence until his death, and many modern scholars have brought his guilt into serious question. The case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and unreliable witness testimonies, and many have criticized both the prosecution's misleading tactics and the media's influence on the proceedings.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Bruno Richard Hauptmann, guilty of murder in the first degree.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. O.J. Simpson.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187.
There are media circuses, and then there's the O.J. Simpson trial, arguably the biggest cultural event of the 90s. Simpson was charged but ultimately acquitted of murdering his ex-wife Nicole Brown and her friend Ron Goldman. There are many arguments for his guilt, including a revenge motive and pieces of physical evidence.
Hey, you should see this.
We're gonna need a criminalist to confirm that that's blood.
But the trial was ultimately tarnished with police misconduct, racial biases, and a flawed prosecution. Opinions on Simpson's guilt are influenced not only by the evidence, but also by individual perspectives on larger issues like race and police conduct. Division continues along these lines. According to a 2015 poll from ABC News and The Washington Post, 83% of white people believe that Simpson is guilty, compared to just 57% of black people.
20 years in public service, and I feel like my headstone will say he lost O.J.
What are your opinions on these cases? Let us know in the comments.
Overkill with a sharp object and the police bungled it.